Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Board of Education meeting. If you could please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We'd like to start our meeting this evening with another moment of silence for the lives lost in this pandemic and for those families impacted by COVID-19 within our own community. Thank you. If I could have an approval of the agenda, please. I have Pete and Renee. Any comments, edits? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Tenure appointments. We have the pleasure this evening. We just had a Zoom conference with all of our tenure recipients, and it was our pleasure to be a part of that under these unusual circumstances. This is a night that the board looks forward to by celebrating our tenure recipients. Reading all of the tenure recommendations, the board has the utmost confidence in your ability to educate our students exceptionally well under very unusual circumstances. Typically, this time of year is bittersweet because we're typically celebrating those teachers that are retiring and then welcoming our tenured teachers who represent the future of our district. Although we can't be together tonight in one room, each of you is with us. Enjoy this really special milestone in your career, and we look forward to congratulating you in person very soon. So with that, I would like to have a motion to approve the tenure appointments. I have Ted and Irene. Any questions? All in favor? That's a resounding aye. Anyone opposed? Motion is carried. Congratulations. Okay, moving on to the public budget hearing. Mike?
Thank you, Amy, and congratulations again to our tenure recipients this evening. I want to thank the business office. I want to thank Darren, our assistant superintendent for business in particular, for assisting with a really uncharted territories relative to our budget moving forward. I also want to thank everyone in the department. I want to thank the Board of Education for their patience. We have a lot of moving parts as we move forward. The video that you are about to see was pre-recorded last week, I believe on Thursday, and we did that for two reasons. One, to make sure there weren't any technical glitches this evening, and two, so that we could preserve the presentation for those that weren't able to tune in this evening. A few key points. The budget that you're about to see is one that's within the tax cap and one that will allow Pittsford to endure during the unknowns of this pandemic and prepare us for normalcy when school resumes, and at the same time provide us the flexibility to enhance remote learning if we're required again per the governor. We're asking people to vote during a time of many unknowns and during a time certainly that's wrought with frustration on many levels. We should all be frustrated, and we are all frustrated for many different reasons. But as I think about where we are this evening and the purpose of the presentation, I think we should be frustrated that, one, we have to adhere to certain laws. We have to adhere to the tax cap laws, which we have. So we are within the tax cap, as you'll see this evening. And within a very short turnaround, we had to adhere to another governor's executive order related to mandating ballot voting. That means that the district had no option relative to this budget vote. No districts in New York State had an option. The governor has come out with different executive orders. Typically they come out on Fridays and often late Friday nights. And so on weekends, we spend our time with our legal counsel and other superintendents trying to figure out what the executive orders mean and don't mean in order to make sure we're adhering to the law. I think that we should all be frustrated that during a pre-COVID time in New York State, when we had a booming economy, that the governor was still threatening to cut budgets because New York State had somewhere between a $4 and $7 billion deficit. There's a lot for us to be frustrated about. We could be frustrated about remote learning. We could be frustrated around our lives being turned upside down. But specific to tonight, I hope that you're able to see through the presentation that we've been very responsible during this time of uncertainty. I ask that you remember that we are living and learning now in a way that's temporary. And I think that's key because I feel that sometimes we get stuck for so long. We feel like this is our normal. And it's not our normal. It isn't. Right now, we're experiencing something that none of us have endured in our lifetime. And I think it's critical for anyone and everyone that's listening to this to understand that, one, we're going to be okay, and two, we're going to come out of this. So attached to that means that we're going to be back to school. And I guess another frustrating part is we're not sure when. But I promise you that this budget that you see tonight affords our current students the same opportunities that the students had before them. And I think that's crucial to understand. I encourage everyone to submit their ballots so that their voices can be heard in order to determine the level of programming we have now and into the future. I share that because, and I'm speaking factually now, and you'll see this in the presentation, that should our budget not pass this year, we'll have to decide on how to close a $4 million gap. And beyond that, we're going to have to understand how we can recover from that in years to come when we believe the CPI is probably going to be close to zero as the economy recovers, as we look forward to next year's budget. So we're going to present a budget that I feel allows us to weather the storm, maintain program, and be within the tax cap. The presentation will be posted on our website tomorrow, and public comment is welcome for those that are watching this evening. So at this point, Matt, if you can go ahead and put on the budget video.
Good evening. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to present the 2021 proposed budget. Just for clarification purposes, we will be seeking any public comment after the presentation this evening. The purpose of tonight's budget is to provide the community with a summary of the 2021 adopted proposed budget in a format that's required by law, supplemented with clear and concise summary of the final budget. This budget shall afford our community current levels of programs and services for the projected enrollment were maintained. Costs were adjusted for factors such as collective bargaining agreements, inflation, and historical trends. It also implements our best understanding and projections of associated revenues and supports. Historical data and forecasting, the New York State enacted budget and released state aid are two examples. The property tax increase, including the debt exclusion of 3.76%, will not be exceeded. This budget and related programs and service appropriations are balanced with estimated revenues. We start the budget process around December, And we begin with a stakeholder group that consists of our administrators, our teachers, paraprofessionals, clerical staff, parents through PTSA, a community member that does not have students associated with the district. It's called our district planning team, and we begin the process by outlining guidelines that will actually shape our spending plan for the 2021 school year. More than ever, it is critical to have a budget that supports our students as we look at the 2021 school year with all of the uncertainties. At minimum, what this budget will do for us is to preserve our current level of programming. There are no increases in program. However, we feel it's imperative to preserve what we have in a time where our students are going to need support and assistance now more than ever. We have a budget plan that will allow us to be flexible, allow us to be nimble, and allow us to certainly adjust along the way, again, given these uncertainties. So as I look at the budget guidelines provided to the board in January, they reference high-quality professional learning. I would add within those bullets that professional learning will include a significant amount of training around remote learning, single-use platforms for ease of use for students and families, alignment of essential learning across grade levels and throughout departments, single repository for assignments, professional learning around grading and assessments being done remotely. Also will include a lot of scenario planning as we look at multiple options of what next year can look like. Essentially, we're preparing for and planning for readiness, not knowing which direction the governor or Monroe County will take us. When I think about maintaining fiscal stability now and into the future, the first bullet has proven very true and very important for us, allowing us to use reserves to protect and preserve our programs. Without the use of our reserves, we would have struggled not making significant cuts to a program. And again, feel strongly that our students need programs and opportunities now more than ever. This slide represents some of the acknowledgments of the educational value our school district provides our students and our community. I want to reiterate that the proposed budget is not growing program. It is positioning us to preserve program and to maintain our excellence. Should our budget not pass, we will need to cut close to $4 million, which you'll see later in the presentation. $4 million means people and program and opportunities for our students. And I do feel strongly that our third grade students, our 7th grade students, our 10th grade students deserve the same quality program that our graduating seniors and those before them have received. We've done a lot within our budget and accomplished quite a bit, and want to thank all of our residents and stakeholders for entrusting us with our budgets. Last year, we kept a promise of removing the one-time startup costs of full-day kindergarten, resulting in a budget-to-budget change of $144,000 or 0.11% approximately. During this time of more questions than answers, we have prepared a budget that provides for the normal, but it's also significantly flexible to handle the unknowns. Across budget lines, our budget managers will be able to shift funds based on the different scenarios that may be presented to us from summer throughout the course of the school year. Our healthy financial position places us at strong foundation to endure the implications of the pandemic and the New York State budget deficit. The goal is to provide for the usual while being flexible and nimble to prepare for what we currently do not know. A simple equation of the budget that's presented today is our proposed budget equals the 1920 proposed budget plus the net cost of programs minus the net of New York State enacted budget and the governor reductions and federal CARES aid. With that, I'm going to turn it over for the next several slides to our Assistant Superintendent, Darren Kenny, and wanted to thank him for his work and that of his department during a time where there's been more variables than probably ever. Thank you.
Good evening. We're going to start with a high-level view of the budget and work down into the detail, and also go through some legally required aspects that we need to present for the budget per New York State law. First, we're going to start out with a summary format that the Board of Education and community throughout the state are used to seeing, and that's by object code of expense. Starting out with salaries, about a 4.4% increase. This takes into consideration retirement attrition savings. All of our collective bargaining agreements, we know what they are for next year, as well as some enhancements that we did during the 2019-20 year in the areas of social emotional learning and behavior specialists, et cetera. That represents almost half of our entire budget, salaries do. Benefits for this year is actually a good news item. It's not as big of an increase as it's been in previous years. That's partially due to good performance of the retirement systems and the rates coming down. Our health consortiums for health insurance has operated very well, and the premiums are far below the market rates. So when you put benefits and salaries together, 77% of our budget is comprised right there, very similar to the 76% of our budget that's supported by the tax levy. So moving on down, equipment. The district does not spend a lot of money in equipment, percentage-wise, and it's a slight increase, and that's from some of the principals electing to forego some supplies and materials and shift it towards equipment-type items. Some of that has to do with addressing remote learning. Tuitions and contractual, that's everything from utilities to consultants that might have to come in, repairs to systems, et cetera. BOCES services. BOCES has had some areas of pretty substantial increase, such as in special education. Other areas of BOCES have been decreases, so overall 2.8% increase there. Supplies and materials, and the reason it says aided, some of the supplies that we get we do receive aid, such as for textbook, library books, computer hardware and software. We're also required to share some of that money with the private schools that are within our borders, and that is based on a per pupil allocation. And you'll see the state aid on that when we get to the revenue side. Debt service and interfund transfers, you see a decrease there. That is because the 2003 large $106 million capital project, part of that was an energy performance contract. That borrowing is now coming off the books. We have a half-a-year payment during the 2021 year, and that is done. So you're going to start seeing that over the next few years. That project, some of the financing, we're going to be making final payments. So overall, the proposed budget is a little over $140 million, a 2.66% increase over the current year approved budget. Next, we're going to go into the three-part budget. This is legally required. It goes back to 1998 when New York State intended for districts across the state to present their budgets in a consistent format and report that data to the state so that they could make certain representations. So starting at the high level, the three-part budget consists of what's called the administrative component, and it's basically the oversight and supervision is the best way to look at it. People that work for the district, they're not part of operations and maintenance, that are not directly working with kids on a regular basis. The program component is the opposite. Basically, it's anybody that provides services directly to our students. So previously in budget presentations, you're very used to seeing, for example, support services and transportation being a part of that. In this representation, transportation is part of program because they're providing services directly to students. The capital component is the debt service. It's also operations and maintenance. Those are the biggest components of the capital portion. The bar chart to your right gives a history of the composition, those three compositions of where they've been percentage-wise of our total budget over the years. And the program component has been right solid at that 75% mark, and our administrative component about less than 10%. The 75% is very favorable compared to looking at other districts across the state that are more in the 60 to 65% range. Drilling down a little, are looking at the trend as far as the actual expenditures and the types of things that are drivers. You can see that the program section is what's really driving the increases, and it's where the money is. Administrative is fairly flat. Capital has been flat with a slight decrease, as we previously mentioned. Administrative component, looking into it a little deeper. This would include the principals, for example, and their offices, so their office staff, the special education office at the central office. So again, special education is another area that's in two different components, both administrative and then the program piece. Instructional services, there's an increase there. Great investment into additional professional development and technology. We have plans for what we want to do with that. However, with the new time that we're in with the pandemic, that also gives us flexibility to use those resources for that, should that be necessary. Support services, which would include finance, human resources, technology, et cetera, central administration, and related benefits. And one of the nuances for the administrative component for the benefits is once, regardless of what component somebody worked in, when they retire, their health insurance benefits come out of the administrative component. So that's part of the reason why you see a big increase at the far right of that chart. We had a lot of retirements for the 2021 year. Program component, again, can't stress enough, think of it as if you know the position, if it's directly working with students, it goes into this section. So moving across, regular schools, that's where a majority of the money goes. Special education, some increases there due to specific services for specific students. Moving over to the support services and transportation, despite some increases in technology and human resources, transportation, we have a pretty substantial decrease. Part of that's because of our shortage of bus drivers. We've had to consolidate routes and make some changes, as well as we are slowly able to hire drivers. They are of lower cost. So we have some savings there, as well as fuel costs and diesel costs have gone down. So the benefits component of program is pretty stable, and that's a factor of when the people retire, their costs went to the administrative component, and the new hires coming in, they have to pay a bigger percentage of their health insurance as well as their lower cost. So things like Social Security and retirement system are lower cost. The capital component, operations and maintenance, that's solely in the capital component. That's a 1.5% increase this year. A lot of efficiencies from our capital projects as well as utility costs. We belong to a consortium of all the school districts in the county, and we buy our utilities through that consortium, and we get good pricing, and we've had very good performance in recent years. The debt service, you see a decrease there. That's because of the energy performance contract, the final payment. So our debt costs are starting to go down. In the next few years, you're going to see that go even more. That's part of the reason why the district has started talking about the level debt concept and possibly another capital project in a few years, and starting the planning for that so that we can maintain that consistent level. And then the employee benefits for that component are stable. The next required item that is the fiscal accountability supplement, and it's part of the school report card. If anybody wants to go on our website and look at the public budget document, there is a binder, what I call a binder, I'm old school, that the state requires us to do. Due to the pandemic, you won't be able to view it in each one of our school buildings or in the library as we're required to put it. The governor changed that law and told us to put it on the website, so you'll be able to find it there. One of the pages is the fiscal accountability supplement, and what it attempts to do is the state takes data reported to school districts, and it's 2 years old, the data, and it breaks it into per pupil costs for general education, special education, and then it combines it for the total district. Part of the reason why the total district almost seems to not make sense is because not every special ed student is special ed or general ed. Some students are both, so that kind of skews that number a little bit. It compares us to a similar district, similar demographics as far as low need, high academic performance, and then across New York State. In the general education realm, we compare rather well on all factors. Special education, we are on par with a similar district, and we're favorable as far as total students. When it comes to special education, in looking at it from a per pupil cost, it's important to remember that percentage-wise, we don't have a high percentage of our students that are identified as special education compared to some high needs school districts. So there's some economies of scale there, and that's part of the reason why the per pupil cost is higher in a low need district. So moving on to the revenue side, as far as how do we pay for the $140 million budget. In our district, because we are above average wealth by about 30% compared to the rest of the state, most of our budget is supported by the property tax levy. In our case, the levy is going up 3.76%. That is within the property tax cap. We talked previously about debt service. The voters back in 2003 approved that debt service. So as the incur the debt, the net effect of the debt minus the building aid on that is what is the local portion. So our state aid is going down because of the building aid coming out, as well as the pandemic. The governor backed out the federal CARES money, and that CARES money is down in the miscellaneous revenues that we will be receiving as a grant. And so state aid is going down almost 6%. Sales tax we've adjusted down. This year's been a banner year for sales tax right up until March. We anticipate due to the pandemic that's going to go down some, so we were adjusting that down. Same thing for interest. If you'd heard me talking to the board in the fall, I was talking about 2.5–3% on our investments. Now we're back down to the 0.5% range, so we've reduced that back. Fund balance and reserves. We have a number of reserves that are basically savings account for specific purposes as provided by law. We are using some of those reserves. The most recent of which, a couple of years ago, the state approved having a teacher's retirement system reserve, and we established that and started to fund it. This year, the rates for the teacher's retirement system are going up pretty substantially, so we are going to pull $300,000 from that reserve to pay for that increase. So good planning as far as thinking ahead and having money set aside for that purpose. We're increasing our reliance on reserves by a little over $1 million to help balance this budget. So the budget is in balance, 2.66% increase, and because it's within the property tax cap, a simple majority of the voters can carry the budget. Looking at state aid over time, this chart is a cumulative chart, so the bars do not represent how much aid we got each year. It's taking the year before and adding the current year. So the gold bars are what the formula says we should be getting in foundation aid, and the blue is what we're actually getting. And it's less for 2020-21 than it was for the current year. So we are approximately 52% funded. The average throughout the state is more like 65% to 72%, depending on which set of data you look at. So right now, the state, if you will, owes us, if they followed the law, we would get $92 million that they owe us. Real quick on the foundation aid, this goes back to a lawsuit campaign for fiscal equity that goes back into the early 2000s, where the Supreme Court ruled that the New York State's funding for schools was unconstitutional. It wasn't equitable. Schools didn't know in advance what they should get. They couldn't plan. So we were supposed to know 4 years in advance what our aid would be able to plan on that, and there was a distribution formula. Unfortunately, that's never really come to pass. To this day, it's still a political process. The formula changes each year based on that political process. There's what they call the shares agreement, where the handful of legislators and the governor go in a room and they make sure that certain regions of the state get at least certain percentages. New York City, for example, gets at least 60% of the aid increase. So the result is some schools are not getting what they should be, and we're actually to a point now where some schools are getting more than they should be, because the state, the formula is not taking into consideration enrollment changes, and in our case, it's not taking into consideration that we went to full-day kindergarten. So it's not weighting our kindergarten students as full-time students. So looking at our revenue composition over the years, and it also takes a look at our total budget, which has been a pretty stable increase and not as large as you might think, especially in the last couple of years. When we went to full day K, there was a bit of an increase than 17-18 year, or excuse me, 18-19 year. And then last year, we kept the promises, as the superintendent said, and we backed out a lot of those one-time startup costs, and we had a very nominal change to our budget. And then this year, we're going up to 2.6%. So the matrix down below, I basically tried to take some information and break it into the average annual increase over a 2-year, 5-year, or 10-year period, both for tax levy and state aid. And you can see that the state aid is not keeping up with the rest of the budget. However, in the last 2 years, our budget at 1.4% is far below the state average. And even over a 10-year period, our budget has averaged 2.6%, and our tax levy 2.6%, always within the tax cap. So a common question I get is, what happens if the budget doesn't pass? And despite the governor having the executive order that changes the way we are voting this year due to the pandemic, one thing that it's silent on, so therefore the current law stands, is if the voters vote no, technically the board has an option. They can go straight to what's called a contingent budget. They can go out and vote one more time and see if that next budget is approved. That second budget can be the exact same budget. It can be higher, it can be lower. They can do whatever they need to do with it. The hard part is we don't know for sure whether there's really time to be able to do a second vote. As far as what a contingent budget is, the board has some flexibility, but the state does say there's certain types of things that cannot be in a contingent budget and certain types of expenses that must be in a contingent budget. A good example is equipment. If it's not directly tied to health and safety or the preservation of buildings, it cannot be in the budget. Community use of facilities cannot be as part of the budget. So in short, the biggest constraint is the tax levy cannot be more than it was the year before. So in our case, we would have to reduce the budget by almost $3.9 million in order to balance the budget. That would result in a budget that's $244,000 less than the current year's budget. That also means that that exclusion to the tax cap, the debt payments, that's no longer treated as an exclusion, and so that would actually reduce programs. So going into some key points, our proposed budget for 2021 is $140,328,172. It's a $3.6 million increase, or 2.66%. Our tax levy, and I'm giving you a little detail or a snapshot of the 8-step formula for the property tax cap. Our operating budget, outside of debt service, if you will, is $101 million and represents 2.3%. So if we didn't have this change in the building aid and the debt payments, our tax cap would be 2.3%. The exclusion amount is an additional 1.5 million, or 1.47%, and that's how we get to the 3.76% property tax cap. So therefore, to pass this budget, we need 50% plus 1 vote to pass. A contingent budget would be $136,445,000 and represent $3,882,000 reduction. Basically, that number is the exact same number that our tax levy increased. So when you receive your ballots at home, you will see the legalese of the resolution for the budget. And this is exactly it. The Board of Education is presenting to the voters a budget of $140,328,172, and that is the maximum spending. That's what the voters are approving. Within a budget, there's a lot of flexibility to be able to move things between codes and make adjustments throughout the year. We have to do that every year. I think our biggest adjustment that we're dealing with right now and the unknowns is the pandemic and what I call the post-pandemic, what we're going to do as we come out of it. Very common to the last several years with the budget. We are also, outside of the general fund budget, we are asking the voters to approve the purchase of buses. We have a capital reserve for bus purchases. That's a savings account for the legal purpose of doing nothing other than buying school buses. We have enough money in that reserve to buy these buses, and we're asking the voters for authorization to withdraw $1.5 million from the reserve to buy these buses. When we buy the buses, it will generate transportation aid, and we take that transportation aid and put it back into the reserve to help replenish it, so it's there to provide use into the future. We are not, unlike some other schools, we are not asking to levy an additional tax to pay for the buses or to issue additional debt, simply to withdraw funds from the savings account. So this is the language that you'll see on the ballot that gets mailed to your home for the purchase of the buses. Again, it will not have a tax rate or tax levy impact.
Thank you, Darren. As Darren alluded to, there have been multiple effects and impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic, directly impacting New York State, directly impacting the Pittsford Central School District, and it certainly has impacted how we do business relative to our voting. The next few slides will provide a brief summary of these changes, specifically discussing the budget vote and election process and the funding of the current and future for 2021 and a little bit beyond. Early in May, Governor Cuomo issued an executive order that modified the rules under which schools can conduct a 2020 annual meeting for the election of school board members and budget votes. Here are some of the key points within that executive order. There is a statewide uniform voting date. School board elections and budget votes originally scheduled for May 19 will now take place on June 9th. The annual budget hearing must be held 7 to 14 days prior to the vote, which puts us in the range of May 26th to June 2nd. This evening is May 26th, and this is the Pittsford Central School District's hearing. Also, there's different orders relative to public notices. Probably the biggest change in this area is that the number of required publications have been reduced from 4 to 2, given the modified time frame. We also are required to send a postcard notice. Those have been mailed out. The postcard notice details the date of the election, the date of the budget hearing, and a definition of a qualified voter. Within our current environment, the manner of voting is certainly different. It's remote, just like our everything we're doing right now has been pretty much remote. So the election of school board members and budget votes will take place remotely. They will all be done by absentee ballots for qualified voters. School districts must send an absentee ballot to all qualified voters with a postage paid return envelope for any election held on or before June 30th. That is what we are working on. Probably in your homes the next couple days, you'll be receiving your absentee ballots. There will also be instructions for how to request additional ballots should you have more than 2 qualified voters in your residence. Also, regarding report cards, school districts must submit their report cards to the State Ed Department no later than May 22nd, and the department must take its compilation available electronically at least by June 2nd, 2020, 7 days prior to June 9th. Specific to the board elections, there will be no minimum threshold of signatures required to be placed on the ballot, except they must meet all other requirements, including applicable residency and age. Candidates will be listed on the ballot alphabetically, and then ballots for small city school districts must be set 30 days before the election. Darren.
So carrying further the governor's executive orders recently, as well as what we know and what we don't know. Our current environment for developing a budget, and a budget is a spending plan, and so we're trying to plan for what we know and definitely leave the flexibility for what we don't know. What we know at this time is the governor's enacted budget has 3 measurement periods in April through May, and then May through June, and again July through December. And the Department of Budget, if the state's financial performance doesn't meet certain standards, such as revenues are more than 1% below projections, or expenditures more than 1% above, the Department of Budget would suggest some changes or reductions to state aid. The legislature has 10 days to adopt or amend that plan, and if they do not respond within the 10 days, the Department of Budget plan automatically goes into effect. The Department of Budget currently is anticipating a $13.3 billion deficit, and we've already gone past the April 30 trigger and even the 10 days of which a decision was supposed to be made, and it's been very, very quiet. Not sure if that's because they're hoping the federal government will provide some additional funds, but to this point we have not received any information on what reductions are forthcoming. The chart below shows the general fund receipts, and this is right from the governor's presentation. And if you look at the 1920 year, pre-pandemic, we already had a deficit situation at the state level. So the pandemic was not necessarily the cause of the deficit, but it's definitely making it worse. So our budget is balanced at this time. We use the enacted state budget, which had a reduction of foundation aid and total state aid, and we knew about these rolling reductions that were forthcoming. We don't know the extent of what the reductions will be, both in total for the entire state. We don't know if the timing will affect the current year's state aid or the 2021 state aid, and we don't know how that reduction will be allocated to schools. Will it be a straight percentage, for example, to all school districts? Will it be somehow adjusted based on wealth, as the formulas normally run? So there's a lot of unknowns with that at this time. So what we do know is shown in the previous slides. We are not as state aid dependent as other school districts. So for once that works in our favor. And basically what that means is there's not as much to take away from us. I've seen a report that shows that if you looked at all the high wealth schools or above average wealth schools in the state and they took all the state away from the schools, it barely made a dent in solving the state deficit problem. It's just simply not where the money is. Unlike New York State, we are in good financial shape. That comes from our audit reports, that comes from Moody Investor Services that looks at our reports and gives us a credit rating, the highest rating we can have, and even straight from the comptroller. We do not have operating deficits. We have 4% of next year's budget in our fund balance, which is the maximum the law provides. As previously discussed, we have reserves, which are savings accounts for specific purposes. We're going to the voters asking to use one of those reserves to buy buses, for example. And we're projecting a surplus for the 1920 year. Yes, there are some costs because of the pandemic as we operate through the remainder of this year. We also have some savings. We're anticipating a little bit bigger surplus than normal, and we will retain that to help see us through for next year with these reductions as well as the post-pandemic costs. We also know that our community values and has come to expect our programs and services, the electives that we provide, and the enrichment opportunities. They also expect fiscal stability into the future. That's a real challenge because there's so many big unknowns right now, but we're doing everything we can to be able to bridge those unknowns. What we do know continued, we cannot justify taking what we just discussed. We cannot justify during this time of turmoil making huge cuts and eliminating programs when we don't know for sure what our target is we're trying to get to. So while we struggle with trying to be responsible and present a budget that takes all these factors into consideration, we just simply don't know what the target is. So our budget serves as a base for us to have flexibility. And our toolbox is we have fund balance and reserves. We have a surplus, as I just mentioned, that we can use to weather the storm. We have retirement attrition. We have other options there that we can try to work with in the future years. We have lessons that we've learned during this time of remote learning, and maybe there's some ways we can deliver programs and services more effectively and efficiently, and not just for Pittsburgh, but throughout the county or throughout the BOCES. The least favorable is mid-year reductions. We're doing everything we can to make sure that doesn't happen. We see what that's happening to Rochester schools, and we can do a combination of all of these things. So these are just examples of some of the things we have in our toolbox that we can try to do. We have been preparing for this day for 15 years. No, we didn't know there was going to be a pandemic, but we've been working for 15 years to set up fund balance and reserves, or as we like to call them, rainy day funds. And I believe we could say it's raining.
Thank you, Darren. To reiterate, the proposed 2021 budget is balanced. It remains within the property tax cap, and it preserves program and services, not only for the 2021 school year, but it positions our district such that we can recover much quicker should significant cuts come from the state or if the economy does not rebound. The property tax cap is calculated to be a 3.76% increase over the approved 1920 tax levy. The proposed tax levy is 3.76, and it is within the property tax cap. The tax levy increase due to the operating budget is 2.3%. The additional 1.46% per law is an exclusion to the tax levy limit because the voters already approved the debt issuance with the 2003 capital project. The budget illustrates a contained tax levy growth, certainly within the county average, despite the lowest foundation aid per pupil in the county. Would like to close with just a summary of some of the changes in the voting process. I'll leave this up on the screen for a minute so everyone can view it. As a district, we made the decision to mail 2 ballots and 2 postage paid return envelopes with instructions to every Pittsford Central School District household. Residents are asked to return their ballots by mail using the prepaid envelopes. Only 1 ballot per envelope is allowed. All absentee ballots must be received by the district clerk's office by 5 p.m. on June 9th. Eligible voters must meet the following legal requirements: at least 18 years of age, a citizen of the United States, and a legal resident of the district at least 30 days immediately prior to June 9th. Additional ballots may be requested for qualified voters by contacting the district clerk, and you can see her email below. For more information about the 2021 budget and Board of Education candidates, we ask that you do please see the district website. At this point, I would like to turn it over to the Board of Education for any questions, and that will be followed by public comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. So at this point, if there's any questions, Amy, from the board, we'd be happy to entertain them.
Hey, does anyone have a question? So Darren, I applaud you, and I applaud you, Mike, for pulling this together on such short notice. You know, I'm looking forward to seeing the results of this vote and hearing the potential repercussions if it doesn't pass is alarming. So if there are no questions, we'll bring it to vote. Okay, may I have a motion to approve the budget? I have Kim.
And Ted.
And Ted. Okay, thank you. And we're going to go into public comment session, which we have the same rules apply. So if you're in the room waiting with a comment or a question, We will call your name, and if you could just state your address, and we're allowing a 3-minute maximum to each question.
This is John Sussman. I live at 29 Sturbridge Lane in Pittsford. I'm the parent of children at Park Road Elementary and Barker Road Middle School. I wanted to start by acknowledging Pittsford alumni who died serving our country and honoring the families who suffered those terrible losses. I'm aware of the budget vote and board election on June 9th, sorry. I support the budget. I encourage my neighbors in the district to vote yes on the budget resolution and the bus proposition. I also want to commend the board for live streaming its full meetings since March and for accepting live public comment in this manner. The last couple of months have demonstrated that providing this access does not at all degrade discourse and dramatically expands your accessibility. So I want to congratulate you on that. And I hope you will consider continuing to do that once the board resumes meeting in person again. I'm sure that kudos are due to Matthew. It's been just a great process. I also wanted to pose a question about the budget votes and board election. And we all recognize that it's an enormous change to conduct this vote entirely by absentee ballot. I'm sure this is creating a lot of extra work for the district clerk, and I want to thank her for all her work. In light of those dramatic changes, can the district elaborate on the process for counting ballots in the budget vote and board election? Specifically, who will count votes? What safeguards are in place for validating the count? And finally, how quickly the district expects to be able to communicate results of the vote after they are calculated and verified.
So this has been quite the change for all of us. And just to give you some perspective, or to give everyone some perspective, when we found out that we were having to do everything online, literally every single district went to every single printer and printer company and envelope company, and we're requesting the same things. And we had to find a way to responsibly vet the process, but not losing our seat at the table for getting in to have our orders met in a expeditious manner. And so as of Saturday, just this recent Saturday, Nancy Wayman, who's done a tremendous job from our communications department with regards to organizing the ballot process or the ordering of the ballots, I had received an email that said that our ballots wouldn't get out until basically the week of the vote, essentially. So you'd get them in your house, you'd have to sign them and turn them in, and there's a lot of pressure on all of us to make sure, one, our ballots are accurate. So every change we make to a ballot, we are submitting to our attorney. Everything from the board candidates to what's presented on the ballot has been approved through attorneys. It's 20 districts in our county doing the same thing. And I know this isn't your question, but I would just think about the amount of money that's piling up when the governor is cutting our aid and cutting costs across the state. And there's a phrase about things happen to trickle down. So they're trickling down to us. So the cost associated with this is unbelievable. In addition, the man and woman power associated with this is unbelievable. And so we have everything that we've done has been in compliance with the executive order and then confirmed with our attorneys. So what both the executive order, our attorneys, and state law say is that we can actually have residents that are also employees count the votes. That is our first target audience. So we have had over 60 volunteers to count the votes. We have worked with the Board of Elections to make sure that we are following all protocol and have them on site. And so we're feeling that, and then in addition to all that, we have COVID things that we have to follow or be cognizant of. So we're ordering things like envelope ordering machine or opening machines, so that we don't have to touch the envelopes that may be fresh from someone that possibly has COVID. We are allocating space in different areas for guests that may want to show up late at night to witness the counting. We're trying to be as transparent as possible for it. We may have our attorney present during the night of counting, but again, that's additional cost associated with this process, which has already exceeded probably the cost of hiring a staff member, a teacher. So it's significant undertaking. So I guess I would just ask for you to understand and appreciate and know and acknowledge that integrity plays a huge role in this process, and we're doing everything by the law and probably beyond the law to make sure there's no contested results in this process. Deb, is there anything you want to add that I haven't mentioned? Matt, can you unmute Deb? Deb, anything you want to mention that I haven't?
No, I think you did a great job. There's fine tuning that we have still yet to go through, but that is definitely on our way to where we're going.
So the last part, John, of what you asked was the time. And so it depends on the amount of ballots that come in. So if we receive 20,000 ballots, in a normal budget, we're done at like 10 o'clock at night. What we possibly could go into the next day. And so we're prepared for a scenario where we hope that we have enough counters that aren't too many counters to deter validity in any way, shape, or form. So we're looking for a manageable number that's a lot, and we have people overseeing each group of counters. And so we're hoping to have the results that evening, but we're prepared for it to go into the next day.
Thanks, Mike. Matt, do we have anyone waiting?
Yes, we've got one more person in the waiting room.
Okay.
I'll let them in.
Tadaha?
Yes, hi.
How are you?
Good, how are you?
We're doing well. If you could just give us your address before you start.
Yep, Tadaha Tavukumar Slavin, 18 Kurt Road. I just wanted to say thank you. John is a hard person to follow, but you know, just like John said, I do appreciate the live streaming. It's been great. And I do appreciate all the work that was put into the budget as well. I support it 100%. But I do have a question in regards to the budget. And I also have a couple questions that are not related to the budget. So I'll ask the first one. So I know, and I don't want to think negatively, like it's going to pass, but just in case it doesn't, have we thought about what some of the services or programs are that might be cut if the budget does not pass?
So here's an interesting, that's a really interesting question, because right now, and this is the position that we're in, and I don't want to make this dramatic in any way, shape, or form. But if the budget doesn't pass, we are researching the governor's executive orders for how long we would have in order to turn around and do another ballot election or budget vote. And it's almost, so my thinking right now is that is close to impossible. So I think that many districts whose budgets go down, they automatically default to contingent budget. And so for when we think about contingent budgets, we think about everything that's not mandated. So things that aren't mandated are things like APs, their electives, their project challenge type things, their RTI supports, their anything related to anything other than the New York State requirements. And so all the things that we experience right now, from sports to music to arts, to APs to additional supports for kids, and everything in between are on the docket. And so that's what's at stake. And the hard part, and thank you for asking that, because the hard part is not only the initial cuts, but then recovery from the initial cuts. So as we talk about the economy recovering and how slow we're going to be to recover as the economy opens up, it's very similar to this, to our schools. So if this doesn't pass and we have to go to contingency budget and make $4 million of cuts. So if you could think about $4 million of cuts is equivalent to maybe, let's just say 37 programs, or 37 opportunities for kids. That's what's at stake. And then whatever we end at this year, so if the budget doesn't pass, then that's the budget we carry over to the next year as it relates to the tax cap law. And so again, I shared at the beginning, I'm not in favor of the tax cap law because it makes, it's tough to make sense of. But we're forced then to carry over the following year to the lowest number possible, in addition to probably a zero or close to a zero CPI, which means that the following year, we could be looking at additional cuts on top of the 37 plus cuts that we are going to have to process in short order.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And just real quick, my other questions are kind of quicker. So at our PTSA meeting that you presented at, you, Ms. Perro, talked about a committee to help with reopening and all the different, you know, options. And what does that committee, or who does that committee consist of? Like stakeholders? Is it everybody? Is it parents? Is it PTSA? Is it just administrators? So that's question one. And my other two are more about school ending. Do we have an official last day yet? And when can kids get their things out of the locker? That's for my 13-year-old.
Yeah. So you just have my whole superintendent's report right there. And
oh, so I'll just wait.
So, but your first question, Tadaha, was what?
At the PTSA meeting, you spoke about a formal committee.
Yeah, that's part of it too. So, but I will address that here. So we have addressed, or we've acknowledged the fact that we're in limbo, and it's a really tough place to be. So we have to forecast every position or every potential directive that's given to us, so that when it's given to us, we're prepared. So what I say by that is, at any given time, the governor can say, here's what you're doing next year. And that means that we then have to do it. And by the time he says, here's what you have to do next year, if you haven't thought about it, it's too late. And so what we're thinking about right now is all the opportunities, or not opportunities, all the scenarios that can happen. So we're looking at everything from, so today we saw the death rate in New York State was at 72, the lowest it's ever been. And so what happens if that keeps going down and we get to a point where we're back in pre-COVID state in September? And so one option is to think about, how do we reopen schools given that kids have been out for a while, but we're all allowed to come back? So we have to think about things like learning gaps, sequential courses, expectations from one course to the next, how our teachers are able to be flexible and aligned with that, and what work has to happen over the summer to allow that to happen. And so that's one scenario. We're looking at hybrid models where students, if the governor says we have to follow certain guidelines, then we're looking at what would it take for students to alternate days coming to school. We're looking at what would it be like if our primary students only went to school. So if it was K-3 and the rest were remote, knowing that our K-3 students really need parents to be with them for remote learning. So we're looking at options like that. We'll look at options like 10 days on, 10 days off for everyone. We're looking at options that if we had to start the year in September remotely, how do we decrease the amount of platforms that we have? How do we decrease the amount of sign-ins, passcodes, passwords, repositories, all of that to assist kids and families? We're looking at what happens if we're remote learning, but staff are allowed to attend school. So what happens if staff attend and deliver instruction out of the classroom during a typical day, and everything in between. So the people on the committee right now is called a steering committee. So the steering committee consists of 3 teacher members, 3 PDAA members, which are the building administrators, and 3 central administrators, only because we feel that we've all had many pieces of feedback from the community that were everything from love how you're doing it to I hate how you're doing it to please keep it the same to please do a 180. So I feel like we have a gamut and we've shared all of that feedback. And so what we're looking at is trying to not make a huge committee, but a smaller committee with a focus, and then look at who we need to invite after we have fleshed some of this out, because the hard part is time is our enemy right now. And normally we would be so collaborative, we'd involve probably 30 people on this initial committee. But our worry is we have so many different scenarios and we don't want to be caught at the last minute saying, here's what you have to do. So I'll give you an example. We had many scenarios going into this budget vote. The very worst scenario is what just happened. And we had planned for all of them and we had planned for many of them. We had advocated for several renditions and we landed here. And I say it's the worst possible because while we're trying to plan for the future and get ourselves in a position to think about the everything from graduation to bringing kids back, we're now having to shift our focus to how do we now run a school like a government organization for voting and focusing on ballots and legalese, and it's been frustrating. So we're going to start with a small steering group and then see where we need to go from there. Can I just say those are amazing questions. So you basically just hit my superintendent's discussion at the end. So you shortened the meeting for a lot of people. All right, Matt. Anyone else? Matt, you're at mute.
Yep, everyone is out of the waiting room, so it's empty.
Well, thank you to John and Thadaha for your questions tonight. But at this point, we are going to close off public comment and we're going to exit the budget hearing and start our regular agenda for the evening. So may I have an approval of the minutes? I have Val and Renee. Any edits? All in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Board of Education reports. The only thing that I wanted to comment in this section is the board presidents of Monroe County that are involved with Monroe County School Boards Association have decided that our meetings are very productive during this time. We're covering everything very similar to what Superintendent Pirro does with his local superintendents. The board presidents are meeting to discuss anything from executive orders, which change continuously. So we're addressing the same types of questions that the superintendents are addressing, and we will continue to do that through the month of June. So I'll update you accordingly with anything that I hear. Okay, other meeting reports, we don't have anything. Dates to remember, upcoming dates, we have the 8th of June, which is our next meeting. And on the 9th, as we've learned tonight, is our budget vote and school board election. And the next section, I'm going to turn over to our Vice President, Kim McCluskey.
So I'm taking over because this section will be a conflict of interest for Amy, since she's mentioned here. So most of you, I think, know how the approval of every year we approve the Monroe County School Board officers. So they have a committee, the nominating committee, who suggests who would be the next president, the vice president, and the treasurer. So as you can see, they're listed on our agenda, and we would need a separate board action on each one. And so we'll just go through them one at a time. So we're really, this is a second, because the first, what are they called? The first
nominating committee.
They nominated. The nominating committee consists of 6 people, I think, or 5 people, Monroe County School Board. So they made the first approval and have voted on that and put forth this slate of officers. So our board and every other board in Monroe County is basically just doing the second board action. So, and Mike, I believe you have to vote on this as well. So the first would be a second for Amy Thomas as Pittsford, as Monroe County School Board. Congratulations, Amy, for being nominated. And can we just have a show of hands? Or we need a, yeah. Everybody? Okay. Congratulations, Amy. We all vote and everybody's in.
Congratulations,
Debbie,
Amy.
you got it.
Thank you.
Debbie,
Who's
so
second?
This is a second.
Everyone
That-
agreed, but who actually seconded it?
Todd did. Todd.
Ted? So the second is for the Vice President of Monroe County School Boards, Gary Bracken from Spencerport Central School District. Who wants to second that? Second. Renee? All in favor? Approved. And then the treasurer, John Abbott of Monroe 2, Orleans BOCES. Second on that. Pete? All in favor? That everybody's in. Did you get all that, Debbie? Did you get everyone? Okay. Thank you. Congratulations, Amy.
Thank you. Thanks,
Thank you, Amy. Congratulations.
Thank you, Amy.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to the financial report. Darren.
Thank you. April, not exactly a banner month as far as revenue is concerned, but for the general fund, we did receive the back property taxes of almost $2.1 million from Monroe County. Moving on to the school lunch fund, basically no revenue. There was some commissions on vending from February, excuse me. We're showing about $107,000 deficit, cumulative deficit so far, as opposed to $108,000 surplus at this same time last year. We are continuing to be careful and trying to make our inventory last as long as possible. Anything that's becoming perishable, we're sharing with other school districts that are
that have the ongoing program, and with food cupboards and other organizations throughout Monroe County that are helping people out.
Great. May I have a motion, please, to approve the treasurer's report? I have Val, second. Ted? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried.
Thank you.
Human resource report, Mike.
The first thing on the professional report, the board has already acted on because it was the 10-year appointment. So thank you for that. Second would be the professional report. And what you'll see on that is we have our appointment of some of our summer help that helps to maintain grounds and things like that, which is a smaller group than in the past, just because we're unsure of need related to certain items around the close down. Normally there would be probably double the amount of folks we'd be hiring.
Okay, thanks, Mike. May I have a motion to approve the professional staff report? I have Kim. A second, Renee. Any questions? All in favor? Opposed? Motion carried.
Thank you. And then the final agenda item is the contractual agreement. This is the reimbursement the district gets as one of our teachers is serving in a leadership role in New York State NYSET, and we get 100% of that person's salary and benefits reimbursed to the district. While the person remains in our employ, we get 100% reimbursement through this contractual agreement. It's been in place the last couple of years, and then this is for the next couple of years as the person continues in the term of office.
And Mike, I would just add that the reason we have presented it to the board is not only is it cost neutral, but should the person ever lose their position in NYSET, we would love to have her back.
At 100%.
May I have a motion, please? I have Renee and I have Kim. Any questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried.
Thank you.
Quick question, Mike. Did we skip over the support staff?
No, we did the support.
Hey, Mike, you stop speaking for a second.
Which was the summer help, and then we did the contraction agreement. The professional
You're good. We got you back.
Okay. So the support staff report was the summer help. We did not do the professional staff report here because you did that when you voted on tenure.
Got it. Okay.
Just for the sake of my own professional learning here, did everyone hear what I just heard that was really
yeah.
Okay. All right. But we're all good, right?
We're good.
All right. So I think we deal with
You.
with this type of transparency. We deal with Wi-Fi and other issues as well. So thank you, Mike.
Thanks, Mike.
Okay.
Okay, moving on to special education report. Elizabeth?
Yes, we have CSE and CPSE recommendations on the consent agenda.
Great. Thank you so much. Superintendent's report, Mike.
Thanks, Amy. There's no need for an executive session. In your packet, there was a second reading on the consent agenda for independent educational evaluations. Are there any questions relative to that?
Anyone? No? I think we're good,
And
Mike.
you have several first reading policies. that range from, that are actually indeed participation in graduation ceremonies and activities, diploma and credential options for students with disabilities, and then special education district plan are all in the first reading. So I have a few other updates, if I may. The first, I would just like to say a huge thank you to everyone that's on my screen right now, because I think that when people look at an organization, sometimes they look at it as an organization and not look at it as individual people that are part of an organization that really want to promote the reason they're in this business, which is to support kids and families, to help and to love, is what I see on the people on my screen right now. And so tonight, I'd like to highlight a couple different people. I'd like to highlight Jeff Kimmer for his work that he's doing on the Pittsford Education Foundation to bring us 150 refurbished, wonderful laptops in addition to our fleet for students that might be in need of additional help and support. So Jeff, thank you for that. It's amazing that you're doing that and you're pursuing that in the midst of all this. So that's great. I also want to thank Matt Kwiatkowski for me being annoying with so many texts and calls and around making sure our Zoom works and that it's secure, and that we just want to be not only transparent, but we want to be safe, and he's done a great job with that. So I want to thank also Matt. And behind the scenes, I can thank everyone, but our board members for genuinely wanting to support families that are in need, and helping me deliver now about $60,000 worth of support to families through grocery cards, which is amazing. So you're all wonderful. I worry about the people on the outside that view each of you and not knowing each of you as individuals. And what I can speak to without question is that your hearts are beautiful, and that you want what's best for kids, and you absolutely strive to help families in any way, shape, or form. So I want people to hear that, and I want people to know that, because that's been my experience for my several decades in the Pittsford Central School District, and you're amazing. So a few other updates that I want to hit on. So the governor's executive order came out, which impacts our special education significantly relative to our extended school year program. So our students that attend the extended school year program are amazing, amazing children. And it's such a great opportunity for them to explore the outdoors, to explore social interaction. It's a huge part of it. And I feel saddened that per the executive order, we can't do that. But I don't want to just blame it on the executive order. I certainly understand it. So what we will be doing is working out plans to have an extended school year for our students with special needs that qualify for extended school year remotely, and trying to do it in an engaging way. So to be 100% candid, graduation is something that has just really, that we've struggled with, and actually I should say that I've struggled with. So I feel that our seniors have lost so much this year, and I want to do everything I can to allow them to come together again. And so I've received two emails this last week. One saying that it's, I think the word was, it's excruciating to make them wait for a decision. And the other one was around, it's cruel to make them wait for a decision. So I would just say that what I'm hoping for is by June 1st to have an understanding if we can host an outside celebration for our graduates or an inside RIT graduation for our graduates. And I say June 1st for a couple of reasons. One, it seems that every middle and end of the month is a time for an executive order. And then two, we need to reserve and work with RIT, which is our traditional place that have graduation. So what I've heard from students and the advisors is that a remote learning, or I'm sorry, a Zoom type experience is not ideal, and they would love to be together. And so what we're hoping for, worst case scenario, I guess, if we had it at RIT, is to space kids, heck, 15, 20 feet apart and use the whole place just so they can experience being together, having their tassels on and turning them over and getting their diplomas, walking the stage and doing it together as a class. I think is really important for our students. So if we can't do that for whatever reason, and for the record, that is what I'm pushing for. So I'm pushing for an August 1 graduation at RIT that would be live streamed. I don't know if you've seen like the Citadel graduation, but this would be something where we'd have much more social distancing. Or in addition, we could, depending on where we are at that time, allow visitors to come in, guests to come in with their graduates. So my hope is that we can bring our students together. I can't imagine, honest to goodness, I can't imagine what it's like to be a senior in high school right now. Kids that had their hopes so high in performing on so many different areas. So I feel a heavy weight on me, genuinely, to give them what they deserve and to see if we have the latitude to do that. So I guess our deadline for that will be on or about June 1st. If that's not a possibility, then we'll be looking at other alternatives that are certainly in the works. Because our seniors are so much on our minds, we do have a June 6th celebration that should be amazing. Again, left side or right side, one side of the street will be Sutherland, one side Mendon, but everyone together as one, with 3 feet of portraits for each child, I believe, being held up by a volunteer. I ask everyone to volunteer if they can, as our seniors and their families drive through Main Street. And want to thank Bill Smith and Bob Corby for all their cooperation with us. But essentially, we're going to have it very well organized for social distancing. Each poster is going to have a marker on it. So an M1 marker will be equivalent of an M1 chalk mark on the sidewalk. And then the next 6 feet will be an M2. The M stands for Mendon. So we will organize that along the way for Sutherland side and Mendon side. So volunteers know that if they have an M1, they go to Mendon side first spot, or an S1 Sutherland side first spot. And that allows us to keep the social distancing. We'll require masking, but we want it to be an amazing experience for our kids. We want to blow people out of the waters with us because that's what our kids deserve. We are bringing people back into school the week of June 1 through June 5. Staff will be in to get their personal belongings and organize all the students' belongings for pickup, which are primarily at the elementary level. And that will be followed up with a phase 2, which will be between June 8th and 12th for students to pick up and return materials. And then we'll have an additional phase 3 to allow staff to come in their workspace again. And I think it's imperative to share with everyone some of the guidelines that we have to make sure that everyone's safe when we return, because the last thing we want to do is have any setbacks. So as people enter the building, there will be one point of entry, similar to Home Depot, one of my favorite stores. We'll have a person staffed at the door counting. We'll have the door propped open with that person so that he or she can acknowledge how many people are in the building at one time. There will be no more than 50% of people in the building at any given time. And my guess is going to be way below that because of the amount of time we're allocating. Masks will certainly be required. They'll also be provided. Social distancing is a requirement at all times. Only one person will be in a classroom at one time. 6 feet plus will certainly prevail. And then all the buildings will have a disinfecting plan, and it's pretty substantial. So I want to also give kudos to our Director of Operations, Jeff Beardsley, and again, Darren Kenny for overseeing it. But our custodians will be cleaning door handles, light switches, drinking fountain handles, bathroom handles, faucets, providing hand sanitizers, wiping down tables, desks, chairs, corridor locker handles, stair railings, etc. So I don't see necessarily all of this being our new normal, but it certainly is our new present. I think that right now we need people that come into our buildings to understand and know that we're taking this very seriously, and we are going to promote health and safety so that should we return in September, people are feeling like they're good to return in September. So I guess I would close by saying this, and I apologize for rambling, but I keep going back to something my wife shares with me. She shared with me last week where she said, you know what I love about waking up in the morning is that for the first 5 minutes, I forget that the world has changed. And she said that 5 minutes that I'm awake, I feel like things are normal. And then I wake up and then and then it's the day that we live. And so I just want everyone to understand that we're closer, I think, than you think that we are. And so when you have despair or you're worried about how this is our new normal, what we're doing now, in my perspective, is not our new normal. What we're doing right now is we're coping with a pandemic. And we're not only coping with a pandemic, but in a lot of ways, we're being ordered how to cope with the pandemic. And so we're not being overly creative at this point, other than how we deal with executive orders, but we're planning to be creative for the future. The other thing I feel obligated to share is Governor Cuomo's comments around online education. And I just want to clarify that for a second, because I'm not sure where he's going with it. But I would say there's nothing that replaces what we have in Pittsford. Zero. There's just no way to do it. There's no way to replicate the hugs, the extra support, the check-ins, the challenge, the high fives that our kids get from our staff and from one another. And so my advocacy always will be when it's safe, get us back to school ASAP, because our kids need their teachers. And to be honest, our teachers need our kids. And to be very honest, all of our administrators need all of the above. And we can't wait to be back together. So just want to wish the Pittsford community good health, and hope you're doing well. And don't forget that if you're in need, you can email me directly now for any type of concern around groceries. Thank you, Amy.
Thanks, Mike. Okay, may I have an approval of the consent agenda? I have Irene and Kim. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Okay, old business, anyone? New business? I'd just like to make a brief comment tonight as well. On behalf of the board, once again, we'd like to recognize and thank those in the community that are on the front lines of this crisis. Our continued prayers for safety and wellness for each of you. Similar to Superintendent Pirro, the Monroe County board presidents, as I mentioned earlier, are meeting regularly to discuss the latest news regarding remote learning, senior celebrations, as Mike was mentioning, COVID implications on our budgets, budget voting, reopening plans, you name it, we're discussing it because there are a lot of unknowns and we're all working together to try to develop similar plans. It's of monumental importance to understand the tentacles of operating in a pandemic environment. The board understands while time passes, schools remain closed and weather improves, we endure further hardships and our collective patience runs thin. As a society, we're not accustomed to this. We're accustomed to structure and deadlines and timelines. And we have to recognize that we're in a state of flux, which makes decision-making a challenge for all of us. Local boards are facing a very critical budget vote where we've been given little to no control by New York State. We're abiding by the state law that's mandating schools to adopt a budget in short order. And again, I commend Darren for doing this and helping us get to this point. And developing in short order, we know that the road ahead is full of unknowns. This is anything but business as usual. The good news for us is the strength of our financial standing. The fact that we have a balanced budget that's within the tax cap and we have solid reserves that will assist us during this time of crisis. So I guess what I would like to close with is that we need to remain steadfast with an eye on a much brighter future ahead, where we can all look forward to being together in a world that's more aligned with the lives we're accustomed to living. So please continue to stay safe and to be well. And I think the board also, Mike, would like to be together again as well. This is not an ideal situation for anyone, but we do look forward to a much brighter future. So everyone hang in there.
Thank you, Amy.
Thanks, Amy.
So may I have a motion to adjourn, please?
So moved.
Pete, second, please. And I have Kim. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you so much, everyone.
Awesome. Thank you,
Amy.
Amy. Thanks,
Mike.
everyone.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Darren.
Thank you. Good night, everyone.
Thanks for your help, Matt.
Good job, Matt.
Yes, Matt, thumbs up.